Okay, here we are. We have our countdown. All right, I'm learning this stuff pretty good. It's been a few years since I've done live stuff regular. So here we are, and we had our little music there. The song was Gandana no Uta, which is from the movie Ikaru, which is a great Japanese film. In fact, the little guy here on the swing, you can see this is probably the most famous still from that Japanese film, I think 1952. The music is a great little piece there, a little bit of Western, a little bit of Eastern flavor. So there we go. All right, Mr. Watanabe. All right, so as we get going here, we'll have a few announcements and a poem. Our topic, as we're making our way through H.G. Wells's outline of history, is the Industrial Revolution. We're going to do that, and we're getting through day 260, 260 of the project. And this is, if you're not familiar, our unified curricula here at the Institute. We have all sorts of um, classes, but we want to organize it. We want to unify things. It's one of the big problems with modern pedagogies. Everything's discombobulated. That's true in public school. That's true in private school. That's maybe 10 times more true, I'm afraid, in homeschool. Here at Apocatastasis, we're bringing things together into a synthesis. And one of the ways we do that, and that's what we're enjoying here, is with H.G. Wells' outline of history. This is part of ultimately what will be a 3-year course of study, not just for our enrolled students, but also for our alumni, our larger supporters, and the general public. All of us are going to be able to go through the same cycle of readings every 3 years in tandem. So that will bring great unity to our school. Okay, revolution. We're going to do this together as we come up with our UTION. Okay, there we go. I can cover many bases, but sometimes things slip through, and here is our proper bubble. All right. So by way of your announcement in this class for day 260 out of 365 of the project, let's take a look at Apocatastasis' website and see our event for next month. We have Janice Barcello is presenting on the hidden causes of autism, which we'll see on the screen momentarily. There we go. And I'm going to show you the poster here. So this is next month. We have a presentation, indeed, looking at the hidden causes of autism, what the medical establishment will never tell you, and what we can do to end this epidemic. And we see the image here. And Janice sent me this image in particular that she wanted to use. And of course, we know Janice from our interview show is very interested and very much an advocate when it comes to birth topics and peaceful parenting and things, when that wasn't a buzz term and that wasn't maybe ended up with certain communities that had no business using it. Janice was there long before them, and she'll be there long after those sorts have moved on. So I'll just read this little snippet here and we'll get on with our class. But this is our June seminar. Janice is going to teach an full afternoon seminar in June. And we read that this webinar is designed to address the root causes of autism. The medical establishment itself is the number one driving force behind the manifestation of autism in children. Thousands of parents have already attested that vaccines contributed to their children becoming seriously ill and are slipping over the edge into autism. However, what most people have not yet realized is that the groundwork for autism is being laid in the womb. So Janice isn't just running off to the autism caused it bandwagon. There's something to that, absolutely. But she has another angle altogether. Now is the time for people to come together and collectively address the root causes of autism that have led to a lifetime of debilitating health and relational issues, learning disabilities, behavioral disorders, neurological dysfunction, brain damage for so many innocent children. And so we see that the date is Thursday, the 19th of June, and the cost for this, your tuition, is $100. You would easily spend that what on a tank of gas and a dinner, whatever. You could do all these comparisons, but here is a woman who has given decades of her life to protecting and encouraging the health of children and of families. This is well worth it, especially for the time Janice is going to get in to us with this. And for those who enroll, the recordings will be available. So that's Thursday, June 19th, The Hidden Causes of Autism, what the medical establishment will not tell you. Please join us for that. Okay, checking the tech. All right, very good. Now we move into, on this feast of St. Yves, or Ives, I believe, Swiss saint, or certainly a French saint, who was an attorney, which is something in the hagiographies people marvel about on this 19th day of May, an attorney who was good. So St. Yves, on this day, we have our poem, and this is called General Ludd's Triumph. I believe this is an original composition by the band, 1990s band Chumbawamba. Great name and a great song here. Chumbawamba, whom I believe, I'm certain they did the song Tub Thumpers, and I believe that either was or included in the album the well-known piece, I Get Knocked Down, But I Get Up Again, which anyone who's been through the 90s ringer will recall. I get knocked down, but I get up again. Ain't never going to keep me down. I believe that was Chumbawamba's Tub Thumpers. Anyway, they had a whole article, or rather a whole album, on labor songs and British working class songs, which is a genre much overlooked, even in the folk world, the British working class songs. And they added their own compositions, and they resurrected some old ones from the 18th century all the way through, if memory serves, the First World War. And this is one of their pieces about the Luddites and Ned Ludd, whom we're going to be talking a lot about in today's class. Chant no more of your rhymes about old Robin Hood, his feats I but little admire. I will sing of the achievements of General Ludd and the hero of Nottinghamshire. Brave love was to measures of violence unused, till his sufferings become so severe, that at last to defend his own interest he roused, and for the great work did prepare. Now be force unsubdued, and be threats undismayed, death cannot his ardor repress. The presence of armies can't make him afraid, nor impede his career of success. Whilst the news of his conquest is spread far and near, how his enemies take the alarm. His courage, his fortitude strikes them with fear, for they dread his omnipotent arm. The guilty may fear, but no vengeance he aims at the honest man's life or estate. His wrath is entirely confined to wide frames, and to those old prices abate. These engines of mischief were sentenced to die by unanimous vote of the trade, and Ludd, who can all opposition defy, was the grand executioner made. And when in the work of destruction employed, he himself to no method confines. Be fire, be water, he gets them destroyed, for the elements aid his designs. Whether guarded be soldiers along the highway, or closely secured in the room, he shivers them up, both be night and be day, and nothing can soften their doom. He may censure great Ludd's disrespect for the laws, who ere for a moment reflects that foul imposition alone was the cause which produced these unhappy effects. Let the haughty no longer the humble oppress, then shall Ludd sheath his conquering sword. His grievances instantly meet with redress, then peace will be quickly restored. Let the wise and the great lend their aid and achieve, nor e'er their assistance withdraw, till full-fashioned at the old work and old-fashioned price is established me custom and law. Then the trade, when this ardorous contest is o'er, shall rise in full splendor its head, and colting and cutting and squaring no more shall deprive honest workmen of bread. Tu autem Domine miserere nobis, Deo gratias. Thus is General Ludd's triumph by okay. So they're saying this is from anonymous. So perhaps this was one of the original, or rather the preceding and pre-written composition that Chumbawamba simply cut, as opposed to being an original composition. Anyway, whoever wrote it, it is entitled General Ludd's Triumph, and there is certainly a recording by Chumbawamba. So very grand. Next, we now get into the meat of the matter before we get back to Ned Ludd and what he was fighting. Of course, we get the name Luddite from Ludd's infamous opposition to machines and the looms that were referenced to in that song. And now we're going to get from H.G. Wells his meditation on the initial stages of the Industrial Revolution. Like so much else often forgotten, England is leading the way. Maybe would associate France with leading the way in the Enlightenment. But as we spoke about last week, it was actually the English who cut their teeth, Hume and some of those fellows. And the French really represent this second wave of that, chopping off kings' heads, as we shall do this week. We'll see the English beat the French to it by 100 years. The English, though they are not the first modern nation in the sense that Spain was, were very much on the heels of Spain, much to the chagrin of the Spanish and of the Habsburgs. Okay, now this is a very interesting section where he lays out H.G. Wells, where he lays out the dynamics of the Industrial Revolution, but also just of the economy and of nascent capitalism in the late 18th century, and some of the difficulties psychologically and sociologically with that. By the way, I neglected to set aside classes this week for H.G. Wells. That was simply an oversight. So I will attempt to do that next week on Monday and Tuesday, to take a break from this book, The Outline of History, and to dive into his biography and his worldview. That simply just slipped my mind when I was setting up the classes for this week. All right, speaking about the initial Industrial Revolution in England, and here we come upon one of the chief problems of our lives at the present time. He's speaking in the 1900s, as we've come to call it. I'm still getting used to that, but the first half of the 20th century. What is that problem? It is the problem of the deflection of the profits of progress. For 200 years, there has been, mainly under the influence of the spirit of science and inquiry, a steady improvement in the methods of production of almost everything that humanity requires. In our sense of community and of our social sciences, we're equal to the task. If our sense was, there can be little question that this great increment in production would have benefited the whole community, would have given everyone an amount of education, leisure, and freedom such as mankind had never dreamt of before. But though the common standard of living has arisen, the rise has been on a scale disproportionately small. The rich have developed a freedom and a luxury unknown in the world hitherto. And there has been an increase in the proportion of rich people and stagnantly prosperous and unproductive people in the community. But that also fails to account for the full benefit. There has been much sheer waste. Vast accumulation of material and energy have gone into warlike preparations and warfare, much has been devoted to the futile efforts of unsuccessful business competition. Huge possibilities have remained undeveloped because of the opposition of owners, forestallers, and speculators to their economical exploitation. So he goes on, and then he jumps back. I leave it to you to dig into this. But then he jumps back into the Industrial Revolution, and he has some rather sober paragraphs to finish this chapter 34. These are the last two paragraphs. And I want to really bring our attention to the psychological reality at hand. As the Industrial Revolution went on, a great gulf opened between employer and employed. In the past, prior to the 18th century, every manufacturing worker had the hope of becoming an independent master. Even the slave craftsmen of Babylon and Rome were protected by laws that enabled them to save and buy their freedom and to set up for themselves. Even the slave in Babylon could envision realistically a day when he would not be a worker. He would not have to answer to somebody else. Even the Roman slave could get out of being a slave, working for another. But now, in modernity, a factory and its engines and machines become so vast and costly a thing that they were measured by the scale of the worker's pocket. Wealthy men had come together to create an enterprise, heredit and plant. That is to say, capital. So we speak of capitalism. Capital involves enterprise, credit, and plant. Plant meaning the location of production, the factory, so to speak. The school, if you're a teacher, that's the plant. Wealthy men have come together to create enterprise, credit, and plant. This is capital, as in capitalism. Capital were required. Setting up for oneself, the old hope ceased to be a normal hope for an artisan. You cannot, as we enter the 19th century, 20th, 21st century, cannot underestimate how sobering and horrible this reality is, that setting up for themselves effectively becomes impossible for most of Western man, and after World War II, indeed, for all of mankind. You will always be a slave in a way that a Babylonian and Roman slaves never had to labor under, that you will never be able to leave being a worker. The worker was henceforth a worker from the cradle to the grave. That's the sober reality we face in capitalism. You'll never get out of it because you'll never be able to afford the capital of the Industrial Revolution, of modernity. Besides, the landowners and merchants and the money dealers who were financing trading companies and lent their money to the merchants in the state, there arose now this new wealth of industrial capital and a new sort of power in the state. Of the working out of these beginnings we shall tell later. The immediate effect of the Industrial Revolution upon the countries to which it come was to cause a vast, distressful shifting and stirring of the mute, uneducated, leaderless, and now more and more propertyless, that's our word, propertyless common population. Now, this is an event, a phenomena in society that we have seen even going back to the 16th century with the breaking of the commons, where you had commonly owned land and the lords, so-called, of England kicked off the poor, the propertyless, who at least then had common property to graze their animals. And this creates such psychic dynamics in the English-speaking world. Well, the next shoe to fall, so to speak, is indeed this Industrial Revolution, where now not only are the commons gone, But now you will work for the damn Lord who kicked you off. That's your only option to not starve. And this will create in English societies and industrial revolution societies, and indeed in capitalistic societies, an antagonism ultimately between labor and capital, between workers and owner, between doers and layabouts. The small cultivators and peasants, ruined and dislodged by the Enclosure Acts. That's the breaking of the commons. The Enclosure Acts are a series, actually, of dozens of acts passed through Parliament from the 16th to the 19th century, continuing to privatize all land in England. This creates sociological, economical, and psychological effects just mentioned. Drifted towards the new manufacturing regions, these small peasants, these small cultivators. And there they join the families of the impoverished and degraded craftsmen in the factories. Great towns of squalid houses come into existence. Nobody seems to have noted clearly what was going on at the time, any more than they did last week. In last week, we said that the 18th century was a time of comedy. If you look at the art of the 18th century, it's at a time of opera and comedy and plays. And at the time, everything seems grand. In reality, everything was changing, right? It was simply a transitional point from the wars of religion to capitalist secular modernity, the 18th century. It's a pivotal point, just like a ball goes up in the air, and before it comes down, it must literally stop either going up or down. It must freeze for a moment. You throw a ball in the air, it must, by definition, freeze before it comes down. And that's what we're looking at. And as we move along this week into next week, the ball's coming down and we're seeing a huge realignment. Nobody seems to have noted at the time clearly what was going on. It is the keynote of private enterprise to mind one's own business, very middle class, secure the utmost profit and disregard any other consequences. Ugly factories grew up, built as cheaply as possible. We're not building cathedrals as we did before. We're not building palaces. We're not building cloth halls to last 1,000 years anymore. We're building big buildings, yes, but buildings that are put up as cheaply as possible to hold as many machines and workers as possible. Around them gathered the streets of workers' homes, built again at the cheapest rate, without space, without privacy, barely decent, and let at the utmost rent that could be exacted. These new industrial centers were at first without schools, without churches. Why? Because the workers can't have bonds to the past. The purpose of the school, if you think in the big picture really, is for one generation to pass on its knowledge to the next in the easiest, most efficient way possible. That's a school's job. What's a church, right? I mean, basically, a church's job is to pass on the spiritual inheritance of Christianity in the easiest, most accessible way possible, right? Look at this, right? Cheap, cheap, cheap. This is a word that came up a few times. Cheap, cheapest rate, without space, without privacy, barely decent. There's a connection here, right? They don't have schools, they don't have churches. So notice the living conditions decline as the consciousness of belonging to a larger community and a larger humanity are circumscribed. And that's not just because of grasping capitalists and stock jobbers at the time. This is because on the deepest psycho-spiritual reality, capitalism itself has no connection to the past. It is a completely cosmopolitan, rootless, utilitarian thing. So it's not a mistake that the workers who must endure this are, even perhaps unconsciously, not provided with schools or churches and live in penury, right? So that, notice the philosophical connection, right? So the products of the factories are without meaning, and so the lives of those in the factories are without meaning. There's much to this paragraph. We continue. The English gentleman of the closing decades of the 18th century read Gibbon's third volume of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. and congratulated himself that there was henceforth no serious fear of the barbarians. With this new barbarism growing up, with the metamorphosis of the countryman into something dark and desperate, right? The countryman, the peasant, and the small-time owner is giving way to the atomized worker, the modern worker, right? The metamorphosis of the countryman to something dark and desperate, in full progress, within an easy walk, perhaps, of his door. Right. This is a great way to bring up that point earlier, that things were changing. And nobody seems to have noted clearly what was going on at the time. Nobody seems to know that coming into view is this idea of the working classes. And so the Lord, who is reading Gibbons at this time, doesn't realize that the barbarians, so to speak, that he's reading about are the ones working. This element, I mean, what does H.G. Wells mean here? This element of society, this uncontrollable element, the barbarian, is now going to be present in the nascent working class. A working class which is perhaps within an easy walking distance of the Lord's door. But no one seems to have known what was growing up at the time. All right, so this concludes chapter 34 of the Outline of History. And let's just recap where we've come through in our last few classes. And at the beginning of all these chapters, they have these, these little summaries. So let's reread this little section for the previous chapter. Yeah. So, and this is a good time to review. So we've gone through princes and foreign policy, the Dutch Republic, the English Republic. That's where we picked up things with this series of broadcasts with the English Republic and Cromwell and the New Model Army. The breakup and disorder of Germany, the splendors of grand monarchy in Europe. That's right, Louis XIV. Music in the 17th and 18th centuries, the same with the painting. Growth of the great powers. We looked at the partition of Poland. The scramble for overseas empires, especially India. We looked at Russia and its great game with England. We'll talk more about that in the 19th century. Gibbon and Voltaire we looked at. And then finally, we bring things to a social consideration, closing out the first chapter of book 8. This is chapter 34 of the Outline of History. Now, as we shift to our final plate, our final course in this meal, we're going to look at Ned Ludd. We talked about Ned Ludd, of course, with the song, at least cut by Chumbawamba, if not originally written by them. And this is an article from the Smithsonian Magazine, what the Luddites really fought against. I want to make sure that this article is centered on the screen. What the Luddites really fought against. Ah, yes, I see. Hold on. They give you these different options here. Okay, there we go. And we want full screen altogether. Right, so from Ned Ludd, this weaver, there we go. We get the term Luddites. Subtitled by Richard Conniff. The label now has many meanings, but when the group protested 200 years ago, technology really wasn't the enemy. So when we say nowadays, I am a Luddite, often we mean I don't like technology, I'm not good with computers. All right, maybe was there a different sense to the term before? We have an image here of Ned Ludd, semi-mythological figure There is some question whether he lived or how much of what comes down in the hagiographies is accurate, but there does seem to have been an actual Ned Ludd. Anyway, in an essay in 1984, at the dawn of the personal computer era, the novelist Thomas Pynchon wondered if it was okay to be a Luddite, meaning someone who opposed technological progress. A better question today is whether it's even possible. Forget about is it okay? Is it even possible? Technology is everywhere, and a recent headline at an internet humor site perfectly captured how difficult it is to resist. Quote, Luddites invents machine to destroy technology quicker, unquote. One of those sites like The Onion or what replaced The Onion? No, what was there used to be a mock news site. I think that was The Onion. And then it got kind of woke, and then it was replaced by something else. Yes, okay. Yeah, it comes to me now. So it was The Onion, and then, yes, The Onion kind of got political and woke, almost like the late night comedy shows. And then it was the Babylon Bee, which I suppose was woke in a different direction. It was also quite partisan, I must say. But it was a response to The Onion. Anyway, that's like an article headline you'd have seen in one of those things. Okay, like all good satire, to mock headline, the mock headline comes perilously close to the truth. Modern Luddites do indeed invent machines in the form of computer viruses, cyberworms, and other malware to disrupt technologies that trouble them. Recent targets of suspected sabotage include the London Stock Exchange and a nuclear plant in Iran. Even off-the-grid extremists find technology irresistible. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, attacked what he called, quote, industrial technological system, unquote, with increasingly sophisticated mail bombs. Likewise, the cave-dwelling terrorist, sometimes derided as Osama bin Luddite, hijacked aviation technology to bring down skyscrapers. Or at least that was the story. If you believe a man in a cave pulled off 9/11, well, I'll bite my tongue. But point duly noted. For the rest of us, our uneasy protests against technology almost inevitably take a technological form. We worry about whether violent computer games are warping our children, and then we decry them by tweet, text, or Facebook post. I remember when I was a boy, I wrote about this in my autobiography, when I was a boy at Blockbuster talking about technology. I remember when they came out with the DVDs. And I have no idea, for whatever reason, I determined in my heart of hearts to oppose the DVDs. And every week you would go into Blockbuster and the DVD shelves would be more and the VHS shelves would be less. And I absolutely refused to the bitter end. I'm talking, 11, 12, 13 years old. Up until Blockbuster closed, I absolutely, to my bitter death, refused to ever rent a DVD. And in my mind, I was preventing the DVD technology from taking over, and yet I was using, as this sentence points out, I in fact was using as a Luddite one type of technology to fight another. Quite interesting. We try to simplify our lives by shopping at the local farmer's market and then haul our organic arugula home in a Prius. College students take out their earbuds to discuss how technology dominates their lives in class. But when a class ends, Loyola University of Chicago professor Stephen E. Jones notes, their cell phones all come to life, screens glowing in front of their faces, and, quote, they migrate across the lawns like giant schools of cyborg jellyfish, unquote. I had that with our high school. I was quite taken aback. We had like 2 minutes. We finished class and we had 2 minutes before midday prayer started, and they were all ready. They were all ready. And here I thought they were getting ready, be contemplative to pray. And then I told them we had, 2 minutes to catch our breath. And they immediately, all of them, pulled out their cell phones. So I know the feeling. I've talked about cyborg jellyfish. I know the feeling of nearly running into these Pokemon Go adults. Remember Pokemon Go was a big thing? There'd be I'm not joking, there'd be crowds of them just wandering around the center of town on the roads, on the green, it didn't matter. They were like jellyfish. Anyway, the word Luddite, handed down from British industrial protest that begun 200 years ago this month, turns up in our daily language in ways that suggest we're confused, not just about technology, but also about who the original Luddites were and what being a modern one actually means. So this is, this topic of how the word Luddite is used is appropriate to a discipline we call historiography, which is, amongst other things, how previous historical events are considered by the present. Historiography involves, amongst other things, the analysis of that. So, who were the actual Luddites as opposed to how do we use the word Luddite today? Blogger Amanda Cobra, pretty cool name, for instance, worries about being, quote unquote, a drinking Luddite because she hasn't yet mastered infused drinks. Sorry, Amanda. Real Luddites were clueless when it come to steeping vanilla beans in vodka. They drank and sang about good old ale that's brown. And on Twitter, Wolf Whistle Amy, it's another cool name, thinks she's a Luddite because she, quote, cannot deal with heel heights, unquote. Give it in centimeters instead of inches. Some of the original Luddites were cross-dressers. More about that later. So maybe they would empathize. People use the word Luddite now even to describe someone who is merely clumsy or forgetful about technology. A British woman locked outside her house tweets her husband, "You stupid Luddite! Turn on the bloody phone, I can't get in." She's tweeting to her husband. The word Luddite is simultaneously a declaration of ineptitude and a badge of honor. So you can't hurl Luddite curses at your cell phone or your spouse, but you can also sip a wine named Luddite, which incidentally has its own website. Hope you understand the irony there. You can buy a guitar named the Super Luddite, which is electric and costs $7,400. Meanwhile, back at Twitter, Superman Hotmail Tim, these names keep getting better and better, is understandably puzzled. He grunts to a Nana typewriter, "What is a Luddite?" Almost certainly not what you think, Tim. Despite their modern reputation, the original Luddites were neither opposed to technology nor inept at using it. Many were highly skilled machine operators in the textile industry. Nor was the technology they attacked particularly new. Moreover, the idea of smashing machines as a form of industrial protest did not begin or end with them. In truth, the secret of the Luddites' enduring reputation depends less on what they did than on the name under which they did it. You could say they were good at branding. The Luddite disturbances started in circumstances at least superficially similar to our own. British working families at the start of the 19th century were enduring economic upheaval and widespread unemployment. A seemingly endless war, as we'll find out in triplicate, against Napoleon's France that had brought the hard pinch of poverty, quote unquote, to homes where it had hitherto been a stranger. Food was scarce and rapidly becoming costly. Then, on March 11th, 1811, in Nottingham, a textile manufacturing center, British troops broke up a crowd of protesters demanding more work and better wages. Notice Nottingham, right? Obviously, the association with Robin Hood, a people's hero, and then Ned Ludd, another people's hero in the mythology, right? Not for nothing, Nottingham. That night, angry workers smashed textile, that's clothing, textile machinery in a nearby village. Similar attacks occurred nightly at first, then sporadically, and then in waves, eventually spreading across a 70-mile swath of northern England, from Loughborough in the south to Wakefield in the north. Fearing a national movement, the government soon positioned thousands of soldiers to defend factories. Parliament passed a measure to make machine breaking a death penalty offense, a capital offense. But the Luddites were neither as organized nor as dangerous as authorities believed. They set some factories on fire, but mainly they confined themselves to breaking machines. In truth, they inflicted less violence than they encountered. In one of the bloodiest incidents in April of 1812, some 2,000 protesters mobbed a mill near Manchester. The, the owner ordered his men to fire into the crowd in the best capitalist fashion, killing at least 3, that should be spelled out if it's less than 10, THREE, and wounding 18. The soldiers killed at least FIVE more the next day. Earlier that month, reading about these Luddite uprisings, a crowd of 150 protesters had exchanged gunfire with the defenders of a mill in Yorkshire, and 2 Luddites died. We're going to talk tomorrow about the American Revolution, and I do want to point out, as historians are wont to do, at this point, late 18th century, the Luddite stuff is early 19th century. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's appropriate. We're in the neighborhood. I do want to point out the parity of armaments between the people and the state. The parity of armaments, meaning the state has access to the exact same weapons the people have access to. And I assure you, power relations were a lot more equalized. It's hard to be a tyrant when your victims have the same weapons to kill you as you have them. Anyway, soon Luddites there in Yorkshire retaliated by killing a mill owner who, in the thick of the protest, had supposedly boasted that he would ride up to his breeches in Luddite blood. 3 Luddites were hanged for the murder. Other courts, often under political pressure, sent many more to the gallows or to exile in Australia before the last such disturbance in 1816. It's not a mistake in later labor history. A lot of these guys will come out of Australia, like Tom Barker. Right? Why? Because their grandpappies were shipped to Australia as labor disturbers. One technology the Luddites commonly attacked was the stocking frame, a knitting machine first developed more than 200 years earlier by an Englishman named William Lee. Right from the start, concerned that it would displace traditional hand knitters that had led Queen Elizabeth I to deny Lee a patent. Right, so that's the core. That's the core qualm and the core opposition that Luddites have, is that the machines will replace them. And so in England, you have this group, and in France, you have a similar group when it comes to shoemaking. And these were people who would make shoes by hand, and then they saw that different machines were coming in to displace them. And so they would sabotage the machines. And it turns out in French that the word for shoe is sabour, or something to that effect. I'm not the best at pronouncing French, sabour. And so what the French shoemakers would do to destroy the shoemaking machines that would replace them was to throw in the sabour into the machine, hence the word sabotage. So the word sabotage comes from the French parallel of the Luddites. Lee's invention, with gradual improvements, helped the textile industry grow and created many new jobs. But labor disputes caused sporadic outbreaks of violent resistance. Episodes of machine breaking occurred in Britain from the 1760s onward, and in France during the Revolution, of which we will talk about at the end of this week. Our last 2 classes will be on the French Revolution. As the Industrial Revolution began, workers naturally worried about being displaced by increasingly efficient machines. So it's not just bad enough, to H.G. Wells's point, that you now have men who are looking at a life of working for another with no hope for setting up for themselves. They will live and die as wage slaves. You not only have that, but now you have the stress of having machines possibly replace these wage slaves, and then there's nothing for these wage slaves to do, right? In the moment, you can go into another industry, but what happens when the machines show up there? But the Luddites themselves were totally fine with machines, says Kevin Binfield, editor of the 2004 collection, Writings of the Luddites. Huh, that's interesting. They confined their attack to manufacturers who use machines in what they called a fraudulent and deceitful manner to get around standard labor practices. They just wanted machines that made high quality goods. And they wanted these machines to be run by workers who had gone through an apprenticeship and got paid a decent wage. Those were their only concerns, right? In other words, that the capitalists were doing an end run around the apprenticeship model. Now, the apprenticeship model itself has its own critics. And in fact, a lot, as we can talk about tomorrow and Wednesday, a lot of the American Revolution is fueled, and I would dare say the French Revolution is fueled by the world of apprenticeship, right? So the apprenticeships operated very much in the same way that college operates in our day, meaning it was a way to lock down a field. So modern licensing, the realistically, I mean, okay, so superficially, Joe Blow Dummy believes he's told and he believes that the reason licensing and accreditation are there is so that you have people who know what they're doing, right? Your doctor is licensed, so to make sure that all the quacks are weeded out. That seems to have not worked at all to our upcoming autism seminar. Your teacher is licensed and goes through a teaching program so that you can be sure he knows what he's talking about. Well, okay, Joe Blow. That's why you're Joe Blow Dummy. That's not why licensing and accreditation exist. The reason those exist is because the practitioners of those skills want to lock out labor and drive up their wages, right? The reason you do that is on that front, is to lock out labor and to funnel it through. And there's very few elements in modern society that don't have this dynamic at play. So in effect, during the Age of Revolution, the old apprentice system, which was, if you ever been locked out of a career, as I was with mechanical work, on the justification of credentialism, you will understand how resentful you get at that. But in effect, the Age of Revolution broke up the apprentice system, nominally replacing it by a meritocracy. But notice how the meritocracy, after 200-300 years, has basically come all the way back to the apprenticeship model. Anyway, if the Luddites weren't attacking the technological foundations of industry, what made them so frightening to manufacturers? And what makes them so memorable even now? Credit on both counts goes largely to a phantom. Ned Ludd, known also as Captain General, even King Ludd, first turned up as a part of a Nottingham protest in 1811 and was soon on the move from one industrial center to the next. This elusive leader clearly inspired the protesters, and his apparent command of unseen armies drilling by night also spooked the forces of law and order. Government agents made finding him a consuming goal. In one case, a militiaman reported spotting a dreaded general with a pike in his hand, like a sergeant's halbert, and a face that was a ghostly, unnatural white. In fact, no such person existed. Ludd was a fictition concocted from an incident that supposedly had taken place 22 years earlier in the city of Leicester. According to the story, a young apprentice named Ludd, or Ludham, was working at a stocking frame when a superior admonished him for knitting too loosely. Ordered to square his needles, the enraged apprentice instead grabbed a hammer and flattened the entire mechanism. The story eventually made its way to Nottingham, where protesters turned Ned Ludd into their symbolic leader. Right, this is what I was saying at the beginning. My memory going into this was that there was a guy called Ned Ludd, but he had been highly mythologized. The Luddites, as they soon came to be known, were dead serious about their protests. But they were also making fun, dispatching officious sounding letters that began, "Whereas be the charter," and ended, "Ned Ludd's office, Sherwood Forest," again with the Robin Hood connection, invoking the sly banditry of Nottinghamshire's own Robin Hood, suited their sense of social justice, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. The taunting, world turned upside down character of their protests also led them to march in women's clothes as General Ludd's wives. I don't quite know what this has to do with labor protests, but I get okay. The upside down world feast of fools aspect to it. You do see that sort of thing at protests, don't you? Kind of the thumbing your nose at the status quo, not just the high and mighty, but just the whole status quo. Right at Occupy Wall Street, you had naked people and people kissing each other and music on the streets and classes on the right. This whole idea of the world turned upside down. We see that again and again. They did not invent a machine to destroy technology. Maybe we would in modernity. We fight technology by using technology. We go to our organic farm and then drive home in a Prius. But they knew how to use one. In Yorkshire, they attacked frames with massive sledgehammers they called Great Enoch, after a local blacksmith who had manufactured both the hammers and many of the machines they intended to destroy. Enoch made them, they declared. Enoch shall break them. This knack for expressing anger with style and even swagger gives their cause a personality. Luddism struck in the collective memory because it seemed larger than life. And their timing was right, coming at the start of what the Scottish essayist Thomas Carlyle called a mechanical age. People of the time recognized all the astonishing new benefits of the Industrial Revolution, but they also worried, as Carlyle put it in 1829, that technology was causing a mighty change in their modes of thought and feeling. Men are growing mechanical in head and in heart, as well as in hand. Over time, worry about that kind of change led people to transform the original Luddites into the heroic defenders of a pre technological way of life. Quote, the indignation of the 19th century producers has yielded to the irritation of late 20th century consumers, says Edward Tenner. Wow. So there's a similar spirit in Ludditism and our whatever buy local, fight the man, whatever, push back by so-called consumers that we see. What is it? What is it? It's a similar unease with these impersonal forces. Yeah, technology, but markets, marketers, people, people who run the market and people who run these economies that you never really see. The original Luddites lived in an area reassuringly clear-cut targets, machines one could still destroy with a sledgehammer. Loyola University's Jones writes in his 2006 book Against Technology, making them easy to romanticize. By contrast, our technology is as nebulous as the cloud, that web-based limbo where our digital thoughts increasingly go to spend eternity on data center servers. It's as liquid as the chemical contaminants our infants suck down with their mother's milk, and as ubiquitous as genetically modified crops in our gas tanks and on our dinner plates. Technology is everywhere, knows all our thoughts, and in the words of the technology utopian Kevin Kelly, is even a divine phenomena that is a reflection of God. Who are we to resist? And we'll see that as we move through these 2 centuries here, how people, as Carlyle noted in his day, how people are apt more and more to see things and refer to things and describe their lives in technological and even in digital manners. When we teach health class, you see that, don't you? The use of mechanical language in terms of the circulatory system, the digestive system, the vascular system, or the idea that the heart is a pump. These are obviously mechanically infused expressions, and so it's quite remarkable to know. And we see the same with the digital. And I see that all the time with interpersonal behavior. That's my bailiwick and my bugaboo is the influence and the deleterious influence, in fact, of technology on the way we treat each other. It's not a mistake. The popularity of the term ghosting, and I'm dare to say the practice of ghosting in the age of exiting out of websites, changing the channel, right? There's a connection between how we interact with these technologies and the way we interact in reality with each other. IRL, as we say in internet slang. Anyway, that's it for today. We had a good little dollop of the Industrial Revolution. Let me just bring your attention and mine back to our upcoming seminar in June, focusing on autism, the causes of autism, and the prevention of this modern scourge. And here we see the poster on our main site. It's going to be Janice Barcello, and you can learn about her actually on this very same document. Janice Barcello is going to be telling us about this, and she has a unique, truly speaking, a unique take on where autism is coming from and where the groundwork for this is being laid in the womb, not from vaccines initially. Those will exacerbate the problem, but she's going to argue that the substrata of this phenomena and of this disability is laid in the womb for many people. So that's Janice. She's going to be your teacher. The event is on Thursday, June 19th. The tuition is $100. And indeed, the event is entitled The Hidden Causes of Autism, The Hidden Causes of Autism, What the Medical Establishment Will Never Tell You, and What We Can Do Now to End this epidemic. So we hope very much that you will join us for that and help grow our staff and support our staff in their works, in their research. And with that, we'll bring day 260 of the project to a close. And I'll catch you tomorrow for the American Revolution, and on Wednesday, and then we move Thursday and Friday into the French Revolution using H.G. Wells's outline of history day by day, along with synchronized poetry and literature readings. For today, I'm John Coleman, and I hope I'll be the same tomorrow. Bye-bye.